When the mahogany doors closed behind him, George Soros realized he was the only immigrant in a room full of men who'd inherited their fortunes. What happened in the next 10 seconds didn't just silence the most exclusive club in Manhattan. It exposed that bloodlines mean nothing when you understand markets better than the men who think they own them. New York City, December 1981. The Union Club on East 69th Street. 5 floors of marble and privilege, founded in 1836, where Astors and Vanderbilts once decided America's economic future over cigars and brandy. Where membership isn't bought, it's inherited. Where your grandfather's name on the leather-bound rolls matters more than your net worth. Where speaking with the wrong accent can mark you as forever outside, no matter what you achieve. The club's dining room epitomizes old American power. Persian rugs worth more than houses cover polished hardwood floors. Oil paintings of long-dead railroad barons and steel magnates line walls paneled in wood harvested from forests that no longer exist. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over leather chairs, where senators once carved up territories and banking dynasties divided industries. The air smells of aged tobacco, old money, and the particular confidence that comes from never having to prove you belong anywhere. George Soros walks through the main entrance at 8:17 p.m. He's 51 years old, wearing a perfectly tailored Savile Row suit that costs more than most people's cars. His tie is Italian silk. His shoes are handmade English leather. His watch is Swiss precision. Everything about his appearance screams success, refinement, arrived status. His quantum fund has returned 35% annually for the past decade. He manages $381 million. By any rational measure, he belongs here. But rationality isn't what gets you into the Union Club. But there was something these American aristocrats didn't know yet about the Hungarian refugee they'd reluctantly invited. The invitation came through Whitney Patterson III, old Yale money, whose great-grandfather built half the railroads west of Chicago. Whitney's corner office overlooks Central Park. His secretary's salary exceeds what most families earn in a year. His Rolodex contains the private numbers of cabinet members, Supreme Court justices, and Federal Reserve governors. Whitney needs Soros. Needs his European connections for a massive infrastructure play in Eastern Europe. Communist governments are cracking. Money will flow to whoever positions first. Whitney knows Soros has those connections, understands those markets, can navigate that political chaos because he lived it. But Whitney also knows this dinner will be uncomfortable. The Union Club's membership isn't diverse. Never has been, never was designed to be. Founded when America's financial elite were exclusively white, Protestant, and generationally wealthy, the club's culture reflects those origins. Members appreciate tradition, respect hierarchy, value conformity. They're uncomfortable with outsiders, suspicious of new money, dismissive of anyone who didn't inherit their worldview along with their trust funds. So Whitney extended an invitation to the Union Club's monthly dinner, not because he respects Soros, because he needs him. There's a difference. A crucial difference that Soros recognizes, but doesn't acknowledge. Not yet. Soros enters the Oak Room. 23 men in identical navy suits, identical white shirts, identical gold watches passed down through generations. Old money, patient money, money that doesn't need to prove anything because it's been here since before America was an idea. They stand around holding crystal glasses of single malt scotch, speaking in voices trained at prep schools where Latin was mandatory and accents were polished to sound like inherited authority. These are men who attended the same boarding schools, summered at the same compounds, married women from the same families, men whose grandfathers knew each other, whose fathers served on boards together, whose sons will inherit this same network of privilege and power. They speak in shorthand references to shared experiences, inside jokes about people and places that exist only in their rarefied world. The conversation stops when Soros enters, not dramatically, just that subtle shift when someone who doesn't quite belong walks into a space designed for people who've never questioned whether they belong. Eyes flick toward him, assess him, catalog the differences, the accent they've heard about, the face that doesn't match the surnames carved in stone above the entrance, the fact that his money is earned, not inherited, which in this room makes it somehow lesser, somehow suspect. Right at this point, everything was about to change. Whitney approaches, performs introductions with the smooth efficiency of someone trained in social navigation since childhood. Gentleman George Soros, managing partner of Quantum Fund, polite nods, firm handshakes, the kind of greeting that says welcome while meaning you're temporary. They know his name from the financial press. They've heard about his returns, his unconventional strategies, his refugee background turned success story. But knowing about someone and accepting someone are different things entirely. They know his reputation. Impossible not to. The financial press has covered his returns, his unconventional theories, his refugee background. The Wall Street Journal has profiled him twice. Forbes has estimated his net worth. Barron's has analyzed his investment philosophy. But knowing someone's achievements and respecting someone are different things. These men respect bloodlines, not balance sheets. Respect tradition, not innovation. Respect the way things have always been done, not new ways of thinking about old problems. The conversation flows around topics designed to exclude prep school memories from Groton and Street, Paul's, family compounds in the Hamptons and Newport, genealogical connections spanning back to the Mayflower. Inside jokes about people Soros has never met, references to traditions he didn't inherit, shared experiences from a world he was never part of. Stories about grandfathers who knew Andrew Carnegie personally, fathers who advised Franklin Roosevelt, families who owned railroads and steel mills and banks before most Americans knew what stocks were. It's not actively hostile, it's worse. It's casually dismissive. The kind of exclusion so ingrained it doesn't even recognize itself as cruelty. The assumption that anyone worth knowing would share their references, understand their jokes, appreciate their concerns about estate taxes and inheritance planning, and maintaining family compounds that cost millions annually just to heat and staff. Soros participates when asked direct questions, offers insights when markets come up, demonstrates his knowledge when given opportunity, but he's clearly the outsider. The immigrant who earned his way into this room but wasn't born to it, and everyone knows it. His responses are thoughtful, informed, occasionally brilliant. But they come with that slight accent that marks him as foreign, that reminds everyone he learned English as a second language, that he didn't grow up speaking the particular dialect of American privilege. You won't believe what happened when the evening took a darker turn. Then Charles Montgomery Bradford IV joins the conversation. Charles represents everything these men aspire to be. Sixth-generation Wall Street. His great-great-grandfather financed the Union Pacific Railroad. His great-grandfather survived the Panic of 1893 by diversifying into steel. His grandfather survived the 1929 crash by moving to gold 3 months early. His father built Bradford and Associates into one of the most respected investment banks in America, surviving the Depression, thriving during World War II, expanding globally during the post-war boom. Charles himself manages $2.3 billion in assets, serves on the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's board of directors, advises 3 Fortune 100 CEOs, sits on the investment committees of Harvard and Yale endowments, and carries himself like inherited authority made flesh. His portfolio includes stakes in airlines, telecommunications companies, defense contractors, and emerging technology firms. His client list reads like a directory of American corporate power. He's also the man who publicly dismissed European markets as too unstable for serious American investment, just as Soros was making fortunes there, who called currency speculation gambling disguised as sophistication right before Soros's most profitable trades, who wrote an influential paper arguing that successful investing requires cultural intuition that can't be taught, only inherited, who represents everything Soros challenges. The belief that understanding markets comes from bloodline instead of analysis, that tradition trumps innovation, that being right matters less than sounding right. Charles has been watching Soros all evening, listening to his insights about European monetary policy, his predictions about German reunification's economic impact, his analysis of emerging opportunities in Eastern European privatization, hearing the accent, processing the fact that this refugee from Budapest has achieved returns that Charles, with all his advantages and connections, has never matched. The cognitive dissonance is eating at him. In Charles's worldview, people like Soros shouldn't outperform people like Charles. It violates the natural order. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what's coming. Charles moves closer to Soros, bourbon in hand, voice carrying across the circle so everyone hears. The room's attention focuses. This feels intentional, calculated. Like Charles has been planning this moment, waiting for the right opportunity to assert his dominance, to remind everyone of the hierarchy that should exist in rooms like this. George, Charles says, his voice honeyed with false warmth, I've been following your career with great interest. Impressive returns, truly impressive. But I have to ask. He pauses, swirls his bourbon, looks directly at Soros with those blue eyes that have never doubted their own superiority. Don't you think there's something to be said for understanding American markets the way Americans understand them? For having the cultural intuition that comes from growing up here, from having family roots in these institutions. The question hangs in the air like smoke, perfectly phrased to sound like genuine curiosity while delivering a precise insult. Charles isn't questioning Soros's returns. He's questioning his right to those returns, suggesting that Soros's success is somehow accidental, that real market understanding requires American DNA, American upbringing, American cultural inheritance. That outsiders might get lucky but can't truly comprehend the deep institutional relationships that drive American finance. Several men nod slightly. They agree. Deep down, they believe that markets reward the right kind of people, that outsiders might get lucky but can't truly understand what they're trading, that there's something mystical about American finance that only Americans can grasp. That success in American markets requires more than intelligence or analysis. It requires cultural programming that begins in childhood, generational wisdom passed down through bloodlines, intuitive understanding that can't be learned from books or experience. Soros sets down his scotch, looks at Charles with those grey-blue eyes that have seen fascism rise and communism fall, that have watched currencies collapse and governments change, that have witnessed what happens when people mistake inherited privilege for earned wisdom. Eyes that have seen his father bribe Nazi officials to survive, watched communist tanks roll through Budapest, understood from an early age that systems people assume are permanent can collapse overnight. But the truly shocking part was still coming. Charles, Soros begins, his Hungarian accent making each word precise, deliberate. You raise an interesting point about cultural understanding. His voice is quiet, conversational, but something in his tone makes everyone lean in. There's steel beneath the silk. Tell me, what's your analysis of the current sterling situation? Charles straightens, confident. This is his territory. He's analysed British markets for decades, travelled to London quarterly for client meetings, maintains relationships with senior officials at the Bank of England and Treasury. The pound is solid. Bank of England has full government backing. Interest rates are holding steady. Sterling's been Britain's foundation for centuries. It's not going anywhere. The institutional strength is undeniable. One of the other men interjects. The City of London has been the world's financial centre longer than New York has existed. Soros nods thoughtfully. And your view on the European exchange rate mechanism? Clever attempt at monetary union, but ultimately artificial, Charles replies. You can't force economic integration through currency pegs. Market forces will respect fundamental strength, and Britain's fundamentals are sound. The pound represents centuries of economic dominance, institutional credibility that can't be manufactured. Interesting, Soros says. What if I told you those fundamentals are built on assumptions that are about to collapse? Charles laughs. The laugh of someone who's never been seriously challenged by an outsider. I'd say that's exactly the kind of thinking you'd expect from someone who doesn't understand the deep institutional relationships that stabilize major economies. The pound isn't just currency, it's centuries of institutional strength, parliamentary tradition, central banking expertise. That's not something you can grasp from reading financial reports or analyzing spreadsheets. The room is silent. Charles just implied that Soros's outsider status blinds him to truths that require generational understanding. That his Hungarian background prevents him from seeing what Charles, with his American financial pedigree, sees clearly. That real market understanding comes not from analysis, but from cultural inheritance, from growing up inside the system, from absorbing institutional wisdom that can't be taught or learned. Everyone thought Charles had delivered the final blow seconds later. They realized they were wrong. Soros steps closer. Charles, you believe institutional relationships stabilize currencies? Of course. And you believe cultural understanding predicts market behavior? Absolutely. Then explain this. Soros's voice becomes laser-focused. Right now, the Bank of England is spending £2.7 billion daily defending a sterling rate that requires 15% interest rates to maintain. German reunification created inflationary pressure that forces the Bundesbank to keep rates high, which makes the Deutsche Mark stronger relative to sterling. The ERM forces Britain to match German monetary policy despite having completely different economic needs. Charles opens his mouth, but Soros continues. British inflation is falling, unemployment is rising, the economy is entering recession, but they must maintain high interest rates to defend the currency peg. This is economically unsustainable. The market knows it, I know it. The only people who don't know it are the ones who believe institutional tradition trumps mathematical reality. Charles has no response. The financial logic is airtight, precise, devastating in its clarity. You want to know the difference between cultural understanding and market understanding? Soros asks. Cultural understanding tells you that the Bank of England has defended sterling for centuries, so it will defend sterling forever. Market understanding tells you that when economic fundamentals diverge from political commitments, economics wins. Always. The room is dead silent. Within 6 months, Soros continues, Britain will be forced to exit the ERM. Sterling will devalue 20 to 30%. The Bank of England will lose billions, defending a position that mathematics says is impossible to maintain. And when that happens, it won't matter how many generations your family has been trading American markets. Reality doesn't respect bloodlines. Charles stares. His face has gone pale. Everything Soros just explained makes perfect sense, but Charles never saw it, never thought to analyze the mathematical impossibility of Britain's position, because he was too busy assuming institutional strength equals market strength. Too comfortable believing that his cultural understanding gave him mystical insight that outsiders couldn't possess. Wait, you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Then Soros delivers the devastating finale. Charles, you suggested my outsider status prevents me from understanding markets the way Americans do. Let me explain something about perspective. You were born into this system. You inherited your position, your connections, your assumptions about how markets work. You've never had to question whether you belong, so you've never had to prove you understand anything deeply. The room holds its breath. I was born in Budapest, survived Nazi occupation by watching my father bribe officials, forge documents, hide our Jewish identity, fled communist takeover when tanks rolled through our neighborhood and neighbors disappeared overnight, studied at the London School of Economics under Karl Popper, who taught me that all knowledge is provisional, that every theory must be tested against reality, that the moment you stop questioning your assumptions is the moment you stop learning. When I analyze markets, I don't rely on institutional relationships or cultural intuition. I study mathematical relationships between economic variables. I identify where current policies create unsustainable contradictions. I understand that markets are reflexive. Participant beliefs shape reality, which shapes participant beliefs. This creates predictable patterns that you miss because you've never had to think beyond conventional wisdom. Charles is speechless. The intellectual framework Soros just outlined is more sophisticated than anything taught at Wharton or Harvard Business School, more rigorous than the analysis produced by any of the blue-chip investment banks Charles respects. Your cultural understanding told you sterling is safe because it's always been safe. My mathematical understanding tells me sterling is doomed because current policies make it impossible to remain safe. We'll know who's right in 6 months. The room erupts in whispers. Several men look impressed despite themselves. Others look uncomfortable, like Soros just violated social protocols they didn't know existed. But everyone recognizes what just happened. The outsider just intellectually dismantled the insider using pure analytical precision. But what happened next shocked everyone in that room. Charles, to his credit, absorbs this, processes it, realizes he just got outthought by someone he dismissed as culturally incompetent. For a moment, his inherited arrogance cracks. Behind it, there's something else. Curiosity, respect, the recognition that he just learned something important about markets, about analysis, about the difference between assuming you understand something and actually understanding it. George, Charles says quietly, his voice lacking its earlier condescension, I may have misjudged your perspective. Soros nods. Charles, you have tremendous advantages, capital, connections, institutional access, but advantages become disadvantages when they prevent you from seeing clearly. Your cultural insider status makes you assume certain things are permanent, that mathematics says are temporary. What would you recommend? Question everything, especially the things everyone in this room takes for granted. The moment consensus becomes overwhelming is the moment to examine whether consensus is wrong. Markets punish groupthink more ruthlessly than any other force in human experience. 9 months later, September 16th, 1992, Black Wednesday, George Soros breaks the Bank of England. Sterling crashes out of the ERM exactly as he predicted. The Bank of England loses £3.3 billion in a single day trying to defend an unsustainable position. Soros makes $1.1 billion in profit. The trade becomes legendary, studied in business schools, analyzed in economics textbooks, remembered as the day one man's mathematical analysis defeated an entire nation's institutional pride. Charles Bradford calls Soros the next day. I owe you an apology, he says. And I'd like to learn from you. Charles, Soros replies, the best traders are the ones who can admit they were wrong. Come to London. Let me show you how to analyze currency markets without relying on institutional assumptions. Charles becomes one of Soros's most successful students, not because he abandons his advantages, but because he learns to combine institutional access with analytical rigor. He stops assuming his cultural background gives him mystical market insight and starts treating markets as mathematical systems that reward understanding over inheritance. His returns improve dramatically. His clients benefit enormously. His reputation evolves from inherited authority to earned expertise. Years later, Charles tells colleagues about that night at the Union Club, about how an immigrant refugee taught him that outsider perspective is actually an advantage when analyzing complex systems. That questioning assumptions matters more than inheriting conclusions. That 10 seconds of intellectual honesty can teach you more than 10 generations of cultural tradition. The lesson spreads through Wall Street's elite circles. Being an outsider isn't a disadvantage when thinking clearly matters more than thinking conventionally. George Soros proved that mathematical analysis trumps cultural assumptions every time. That markets don't care about your bloodline, your accent, or your grandfather's achievements. They care about whether you understand how they actually work. So here's the question for you. What assumptions are you carrying because everyone around you carries them? What conventional wisdom are you accepting because it comes from people who look like authority? Because sometimes the outsider who has to prove everything sees what the insider who inherits everything misses. And 10 seconds of clear thinking can expose decades of inherited blindness. The man they dismissed as just another immigrant trader changed how financial markets work forever, not despite his outsider status, because of it.